Hello, everyone. My name is Nathan Kellum. I am the Product Communications Specialist at Leica Camera USA. Thank you so much for joining us for this tech talk on Noctilux lenses. Before I introduce my co-host, I'd like to do a little bit of housekeeping. You will see that on the right-hand side of your screen, there is a chat function. We would love for you to let us know where you're tuning in from. It is also an opportunity for you to input your questions. We will do our best to answer as many as we can during this conversation. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce some of my co-hosts. First of all, we have John Kryler here with us. John, you are the Senior Product Specialist. Good to see you.
Good seeing you, Nathan. Glad to be here, talking about some of my favorite lenses. Basically, it's my hope that we can keep it under 3 hours today. So
that's my hope as
hopefully.
Well.
But
and I also
really,
like to.
It's great, just great to be here. Thank you.
I also like to introduce another co-host, Phil Krenkel. Phil, good to see you today.
Hey, thanks for having me back. It's been a while since I've been with the public eye, so thank you. Appreciate it.
It's good to see you. All right, so let's dive in to the Noctilux conversation here. I think it's important to talk about where the naming convention starts first. The word Noctilux, where does it come from? So we'll bring up some slides right here. And if we divide the word Noctilux, we first have the word nocti, which is a Latin word, which means night. We also have lux, which means light. So you can see that right off the bat, Leica wants us to use these lenses in low light at nighttime. And because the first Noctilux came out in 1966, and this was during the film days, having as much available light as possible entering your camera was really something people were looking for. We'll talk more about that and how that interacts with the digital cameras of today. But before we get into that, I think it's important to talk about how Leica sees this lineup. So we had the opportunity to talk to some of our colleagues in Germany about these lenses, and specifically with Peter Karba, who says that these lenses are technology drivers and light giants. Let's get into this. So first of all, I think it's important to talk about why we make these lenses in the sense that these are lenses specifically for creators. Creators are looking to get as much light as possible into these lenses. We have lenses that range from aperture 1.25 all the way to 0.95. And I think that's what's really special about these particular lenses at Leica is that these lenses are incredibly compact. They're designed to be used with our M cameras, our rangefinder cameras. And to do so, these systems need to be, or these lenses need to be very, very small and compact. So that's one point. Secondly, what we do is we try to do our best to manufacture these lenses to the highest quality possible. One of the things that we try to do for these lenses is that the performance of these lenses need to be incredibly high, wide open. So if you decide to purchase a lens with a 1.2 aperture or a 0.95 aperture, we want you to utilize that lens at those apertures and have an incredible experience. And this is also where you're going to see the best rendering of that particular lens. To make that happen, there is a team of craftspeople in Germany, men and women working on these lenses. These lenses are handmade in Germany up to the highest level of care. It takes about 30 different steps to make one of these lenses, and it takes 1 hour to polish a single side of a glass element. So a lot of time and effort is utilized to make these lenses, and a lot of time and effort is utilized for the care of these lenses. Now, another component that we talk about here with these lenses is durability. This is something that we do with all of our lenses, but this is particularly important with our Nautolux lenses that tend to be a little bit larger than our other M lens counterparts. And when we speak about durability, there's a lot of different things that we do, including testing these lenses in very cold or hot temperatures, testing these lenses with different values of humidity, even testing these lenses at different kind of pressure components to these lenses here. And one of the things that we do is that we test these lenses, we do an MTF chart before we test these lenses and after we test these lenses to see if there's any variation between before and after we send them to the torture room, so to speak. Because ultimately, we want to make sure that these lenses last a lifetime. We want to make sure that these lenses can be passed down. And we want these lenses to be used all around the world. And so it's very important to us to make sure that these lenses work in the most challenging of circumstances. And finally, one of the most interesting attributes of the Nautolux lenses is that the research and development that Leica does to create these lenses is then passed on to other lenses. So for example, when we consider the development of the 0.95 50mm Nautolux lens, the knowledge that we gained from that lens was then utilized in the design and the manufacturing of the 21mm Summilux lens, another fantastic lens that we offer, the fastest wide-angle lens that we have in our M system. So now that we talked a little bit about how Leica sees these lenses, let's talk about the history of the Nautolux lenses. John, I'll take it to you.
All right. Hey, thanks, Nathan. And I see we're getting some questions in the Q&A panel, so keep those coming. And again, we'll try to answer those as we go through today's program. So we're always interested in hearing questions from the audience, and oftentimes they allow us to make a point that we may not have thought about. So we talk about the history of the Nautolux, as Nathan had mentioned. Beginning in 1966, we had the Nautolux, the first lens that we made, that was a 50 f1.2. It was a very challenging lens to make. It had two aspheric surfaces to lens, and at this point in history, we were hand grinding the elements, so it was extremely difficult. And as you can see, we made that lens for about 9 years, and I think there's somewhere between 1,500 to 2,000 samples that went to the market. So then in 1976, that's the Spirit, Mandler, a Mandler design, the Nautolux F1 was introduced. What was interesting about this lens is there was no aspheric elements. And we'll talk a little bit more. Actually, we don't have any pictures of that lens taken with that lens. But again, it was kind of, again, what we're talking about is a technology driver that led then to the 095, a Peter Carba design in 2008. And this is a lens with I want to say it's one aspheric element, and just an incredible lens. We've got some great images to kind of show how we like to use it, both traditional and non-traditional types of images. Then in 2017, we had the Nautolux 75 f1.2, my favorite lens in the entire lineup. It's a lens I shoot quite a bit, really enjoy it. And then in 2021, we introduced the reissue of the Nautolux M 50 f1.2. So while this lens is a reissue, it's the same optical formula, but there are some differences. Some of the glass, I think the glass for one element is no longer available, but the rendering characteristics is very similar and same optical formula to the original. And I remember one time hearing Peter Carba kind of joke about that it took us till let's say 2020 to figure out how to make a lens that we designed in 1966. So again, that's for Leica and really for any manufacturer, the most greatest challenge, I would say, for us in a manufacturing standpoint is to actually design a lens that achieves what we want from optical performance and have the ability to actually produce it. So again, that's always a challenge. And many of these lenses took many years and many prototypes to kind of make. So I think the first lens we're going to talk about is the Noctilux 50 f1.2, the reissue. And Nathan, did you want to take it from here?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, just to recap on what you said, John, the lens came out in 1966. It was available to 1975. There was a total of 1,757 units total. The spheric elements were hand ground. That was the main challenge between this lens as far as manufacturing. We were able to make this lens, but it was so complicated because everything needed to be done completely by hand. Now with today's technology, we're able to facilitate some user processes to make these lenses. And this is why we reissued it. I think it's a wonderful way to kind of go back in time and to shoot with a lens that was originally designed for photojournalists, shooting in low light situations. What was really nice about this lens is that back in the film days, we of course were limited by the film that we were using. And so having a lens that could accept a tremendous amount of light like this 50mm 1.2 allowed photographers to go into darker environments to shoot and to capture these wonderful stories that we've seen throughout the years. I had the opportunity to take the reissue of this lens to a baseball game. I hope we have a couple baseball fans in the attendance here. These are the Mariners. I live in Seattle, long-suffering Mariners fan. And one of the most interesting things about going to a baseball game with a camera is that a lot of times the ballpark doesn't allow you to bring a full-frame camera. There's certain rules and regulations as far as the size of your camera and how you can use it. But what's really wonderful about the 51.2 is that it is very compact, considering that it is a 50mm 1.2 lens. So paired with the M11, we have a 60 megapixel full frame sensor and lots of light potential with that 51.2. Now we have two images in front of us here. And what's really amazing about this lens is that you can really change the emotional quality of the photograph just by the lighting. You can see that on the left-hand side, we have more of a dramatic, cinematic feel to the lighting. And on the right-hand side, we have a very different kind of mood. One of the things I love about this lens is how this lens renders. Specifically, when we look at the out of focus areas, the bokeh on this lens is this kind of explosive, fluffy bokeh that we see here. And I really love the way it makes me feel when I look at these photographs. It's very different than the designs that we have today, which are a little more modernized. The 50mm 1.2 does showcase a little bit of distortion, does showcase a little bit of aberration. But I love that because it brings a sort of energy, it brings an emotional quality to the situation that you just can't get with these more modern, with lenses that were designed to be more controlled. Now, one of the things that I tend to bring this lens, or one of the environments I bring to this lens to, is environments where there's a lot of energy, a lot of movement. I've seen different images from different customers use this lens in similar situations in which the lens rendering really embellishes the situation that you are in. I'm going to show you a close-up of the right-hand shot with the Mariner Moose right here. You can see that I was focusing on the hand, right where the Mariner Moose was giving out high fives to different fans. And I love, again, that transition between the in-focus areas and the out-of-focus areas and how that transition is beautifully rendered with a high-resolution sensor like the M11 camera. Now, something that you may notice is that there is distortion with this lens. You're going to see some chromatic aberration on the edges of our subject right here. You can see it a little bit on the fan in front of the Mariner Moose. You can also see it on the Mariner Moose's jersey, which is completely white. And this is an extreme situation because we're shooting in direct sunlight onto a contrasty subject. Now, this is a shot that has been unedited as far as controlling those distortions. I've let everything as it is. And I was really surprised to see that this lens is almost 60 years old. The optical design is almost 60 years old. And despite the fact that it's almost 60 years old, the distortions are very well controlled. I was very surprised of how good this lens was, especially with a high resolution sensor like the M11. You can see that even wide open, we have a tremendous amount of detail available to us in the hair and of the Mariner Moose, for example. But we also get to see that beautiful transition again from the in focus to out of focus with the net behind the Mariner Moose and the fans behind that net there. John, what has been your experience with this lens?
Well, I would say very similar. The one thing that I really like about it is wide open. It has this beautiful softness that really allows you to create images that are timeless. You can't easily timestamp them. And then if you want it sharp or sharper, stopping down to f2 or 2.8 really changes the personality of the lens. But here, I love photographing automobiles, and I thought it would be an interesting kind of exercise to photograph some older race cars. And to me, I just really like that transition, much like you, from the plane of focus to and from the plane of focus, and how natural or three-dimensional that looks. And that is one of our chief objectives in designing a lens, is we want to basically create lenses that render as you see them. So for me, it's I think that's why I like the Noctilux. I don't know if I actually see like a Noctilux renders, but I like the way it looks. So, older cars, again, kind of a timeless feel to it. And, no matter the light, I have another example that I'll talk about in a bit, but that's the other thing, is shooting it in different kinds of light. The rendering changes kind of just a little bit, like we saw with the Mariner Moose in that hard light, how sharp that plane of focus is.
One of my favorite things about these shots, John, is that, the timeless nature, like you mentioned, if it wasn't shot on digital, maybe I wouldn't be able to know when this was shot. The rendering of this lens is very reminiscent of that vintage style of making of optical design. And there's something special about that, of kind of going back into the past, of seeing how maybe other photographers saw decades ago, especially with the subject matter that we have here on the right-hand side with that older car. I find it very evocative of the times.
Right. No, I agree. The DuPont there, again, it kind of adds to it. And many of the photographers I talk to, like, one of their goals in general is to create images that are timeless, that you cannot timestamp. They may call them iconic. For me, it's just trying to create images that, for me, are visually interesting. So again, it's a great lens that really definitely has that vintage vibe, with a little more activity in the bokeh than a modern lens does.
We'll transition over to these images right here. Wanted to showcase a different kind of photography with these lenses. A lot of people navigate toward or gravitate toward portraiture with this lens because of the 1.2 aperture lens. But I usually recommend to try different kinds of photography with these lenses. And one of the things I tested out is working for a business, corporate industrial work. And there's a lot of different clients out there that need work to showcase their businesses, whether it be architectural work or more editorial work. And I found that this lens offers, again, a different kind of rendition than what's available on today's market when it comes to lenses. And a lot of times when you are in that business, you are bidding with other photographers for the job. And if you can showcase that you offer a different kind of feel, a different kind of look, you may have better opportunities to get that job because it is different, it is unique. And so this is what I did for this particular bar here in Seattle. You can see that with this lens, both of these images are shot wide open. You have this wonderful glow onto the building right there. You can see that there's a little bit of bokeh that's starting to form inside of the building. And on the left-hand side, I decided to do some more interior kind of editorial shots. And what I wanted to do with this shot is that I wanted to focus on the performance of this lens, specifically bokeh in the foreground. So a lot of customers and a lot of photographers speak about the bokeh in the background behind your subject, but a good lens offers great bokeh in your foreground as well. And so as I was focusing on the wallpaper, someone in front of me was raising their glass to take a sip of their wine, and allowed me to add a little bit of depth to that image. And I just love how this lens renders out of focus elements in the foreground as well. So definitely recommend people to try this. Utilize elements in front of you, in front of the subject, behind your subject, to accentuate the depth that's possible in your environment. This type of lens works really well, in my opinion, for not only bars, but also restaurants, people that are, craftspeople, people that are making things. If there's an emotional connection to your subject, this lens really embellishes that part of your photography. And now, John, back to you for some portraits.
Okay. So as I had mentioned, kind of the difference in the rendering characteristics, whether you're shooting in hard light or a softer light. The hard light, which I always would gravitate to, I like kind of a high contrast portrait, particularly if the subject can actually benefit from it. But here, for me, shooting both wide open, you can really see the difference in terms of the rendering characteristics. And even the image that's in hard light looks much sharper than the image then on the right that's in a softer light situation. Both images to me have a very three-dimensional feel. In this case, while the hard light is very interesting in terms of sharpness and clarity, to me, a lot of times for a portrait, what I like to bring out is something a little softer, something that's putting a little bit of emotion to the image. And the 51.2 reissue for me does an excellent job in terms of rendering skin tone, skin texture. The 75, as we'll show, I think for some people it's not as kind as this lens would be. And again, it's the rendering characteristics of this optical design that was initially, I guess, the idea of the lens for us at Leica was for press photographers to shoot in low light. And it was kind of the first aspheric lens, but also the first lens that we made that was in black paint to go, more or less more stealthy than all our silver lenses. So again, it's something when I test a lens, I try different types of light wide open and stop down, and just get an idea of the rendering characteristics of that lens.
Yeah, and I can see that we are seeing one of the characteristics that we'll talk about in just a moment, which is that swirly bokeh on the left-hand side there, that portrait, the background is just melting behind your subject.
Yeah.
And that's really beautiful. We have a
creamy
moment
sharpness.
the creamy sharpness, indeed, yes.
Yeah, definitely.
We are starting to receive some questions. Thank you so much for asking. We have a question from Gary Ho. Compare the look of these lenses using digital versus film. Phil, have you had the experience to shoot some of these lenses with a film camera? What are your thoughts on that?
I did temporarily. Unfortunately, I don't have my M6 anymore. That went to to Matt out there. But I guess I shot with it so long for digital that I don't really have any hard comparisons, but it is very beautiful. It's a very romantic look. If you take away all the technology and technical terms aside, all I could say it's romantic.
I totally agree with you. And in my experience, the rendering is not so much about the sensor or the film that you're using, it is that lens. So the lens is going to be the one deciding the look of the bokeh, the contrast, all these different elements. Now, the film that you use may add to that, maybe if you're having a contrasty film or a film with a little bit finer grain, but ultimately, these two mediums will work very similar. You're going to get a lot of the similar look that we're talking about today. John, what are your thoughts?
I agree with Phil. I think it's a more emotional rendering than what digital, particularly as resolution increases, pixel dimension gets smaller. I think we start to see a little bit. We see more detail, and with film, you kind of get it's a different response to light. So where film is nonlinear and its reaction to light, and using lenses kind of reflects that to the point where I think the transition is for lack of a better word, smoother than it would be with a higher resolution digital camera. It's just a different look, and even more timeless for a lot of photographers. And I think that's part of the lure of shooting film, is you're creating images that it's hard to tell when they were created, particularly with a vintage lens.
Yeah,
you just don't know. But that's what I've seen looking at, again, kind of pixel peeping with scans of film versus a high-res digital camera.
in my experience, one of the cool things about digital, especially if you have a high resolution sensor, is that you get to explore a little bit more in depth the rendering of that lens. You can zoom in and you can see, okay, at the point of focus, this is how it, this is the rendering of it. And you can actually see the transition as it goes out of focus. There's certain film types that allow you to see and that have a lot of resolution, but shooting with 60 megapixels with these lenses, you can really see how this lens interact with your environment. And I think that's really cool for those who are really interested in diving deeper into the optical formula of these lenses. We'll show you two last images for this particular lens right here. Wanted to showcase two other components of this rendering. We talked a little bit about the swirly bokeh that forms around your subject. You can see that with the cat image, both in front and behind that cat. And also flares. This lens has a beautiful flare to it, especially if you point the camera and the lens directly toward your light source. Flares is a really interesting component that you can use to compose your images in a different way. It also adds a little bit of depth to your images because there's going to be maybe something in front of your subject. And particularly with this lens, I love how the flare has this kind of rainbow attribute to it. So you're adding a lot of color to these images with flares. And with that, we're going to transition over to a more modern lens, the 0.95 Noctilux. What's really interesting about this lens is that when this lens came out in 2008, it was the fastest spherical lens in the world. It was such an exquisite release, excuse me, that a lot of people didn't believe that Leica could make something like this as small as it actually is. And again, this is really a technology driver. There was a lot of research and development to make this lens, something that we then utilized in the manufacturing of the 21 millimeter Summilux lens, the 24 millimeter Summilux lens, and even some of the attributes that we learned with this lens were applied to the 35 APO lens as far as manufacturing. So a lot of advancements happened with the release of this lens that then was pushed to even things that we make today. So it's really, really impressive. Phil, you've had a lot of experience with this lens. I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I'll talk about it from a few perspectives. One from what I saw as a teacher with Leica, and one is from the sales side, and one from just being a user myself with it. Now, this lens, it is a very emotional lens. If you want to get into this lens, I found that you actually have to develop a relationship with it. I know that sounds corny, but this lens, at least at the time, was the hardest lens to use in the Leica world. When they sent us to Germany and they taught us on it, Peter Karba said the depth of field on this lens will only capture the iris, not even the eyelash will be in focus. And it's meant to do that, to capture like the soul, and then the rest of that is out of focus to direct your view into the eyes. And somehow over the reviews and stuff, they just started talking about the low light capability. But in essence, I thought that was kind of cool, like, wow, not even the eyelash is in focus. And then Peter made a comment. He's like, this is meant to be shot at 0.95. If you can't shoot this lens at 0.95, you're not worthy enough to have the Noctilux. And I remember the whole class going like, ooh, that was a jab. And I thought it was kind of funny. But then over the years, we've all worked with like thousands of students in the Leica Academy. And the most disheartening thing that you see is people that have had this lens in their bag for like months, weeks, years, even the previous models, years. And it just kind of sat there because they spent all this money on it and they just gave up on using it. And just over time, I was like, wow, that's kind of unfortunate. And it's like buying a really nice car, but you're too afraid to go 210 miles an hour if you got like a supercar, right? And so I kind of took it as a personal challenge. I'm like, listening to what Peter said and me having access to it, I'm just going to try to master it. And it took about 6 months. I shot this lens for 6 months without taking it off. And the epiphany came to me when I was walking with a friend that's an engineer, and he was constructing a building out in downtown. And he just pointed something out randomly, like about the sidewalk. And he's like, yeah, the sidewalk, these are 5-foot squares. And I was like, well, why are they 5-foot squares? And he goes, well, when we build up like stories, you can look down and you can count the squares to make sure that, the building's measured right, or at least pretty close to it. And I was like, wow, so technically if I set my line at 5 feet, I could probably zone focus this. And I did it. And that's when I realized, wow, you could do it 10 and 15. And that's why I've mastered the lens at 5 and 10 feet. And at the time, our mentor, Ebi Kuna, his dad worked for Leica. Ebi worked for the company since he was 19. And I was like, hey, what do you think of this, Ebi? I'm going to like sit you up over here and let me see if I could zone focus you in like 2 shots. Now the shot count on this lens is like, it's like 18% if you're lucky, right? You can take like 10 shots, maybe 1 or 2 be in focus. And that's if you're doing it like rangefinder traditional way. But in practicality, you can't do that because by the time you focus it, you hit the button, you might move a hair back or forward, and so will the model. And I realized, wow, this is the ultimate zone focusing lens. And I showed Ebi, and he's like, wow, you nailed it. It's like, that was the fastest zone focusing like technique I've seen. So he's like, you should consider a workshop with it. And at the time I didn't really think much of it, but I knew that I was onto something. I knew that there was a way that I could teach the students, and I started seeing the progress happen with them, and they were starting to develop their styles. I love using this lens against the sun. I love the flare on it. I know everyone's like, it's too much flare, but I love the flare. I mean, look at that sphere. It looks like it's photoshopped, right?
The flare is incredible.
Yeah, I think it's cool. I think it's very beautiful. I think it's awesome. But to do these type of shots, I mean, these are more posed, right? But where it really sings is like in an organic environment. So I just started taking it out to the red carpet, which is, I shoot a lot of live events for celebrities and photography. And, we have this one here. This was Terry Crews and his wife dancing. You can't ask them to stop, right? This is a nightclub. It's very dark. And the only light coming in is from the street of that window and some LED lights like hanging up in there. You got to be very fast to get these shots, especially in the darkness. And I realized, wow, if I could zone focus on all this and master it and figure out how to adapt into the zone, you can really, really make this lens scream wide open. I think I got another one there. Yeah, this was at John Singleton's 50th birthday party. Again, I like using a cinematic frame. I like the 50. I like the cowboy mediums. I like shots that lead in. On the right, his friend's calling him because he's having problems getting into the club. I zoned it really quick before he turned around and moved. So to have this lens, you can develop a relationship with it, but you got to be patient with it. It's kind of like getting into a long-term relationship, or I've never been married, but I'm going to assume it's like marriage. You got to work with it, right? It's a love-hate relationship sometimes. And there were times I really hated this lens. But at the end of the day, I was thinking about like the people I work with and the students I work with, and I'm like, what can I do to figure out to prevent someone from giving up on this lens? And that's why we've got the zone focusing workshop now. People know how to zone focus, but to actually put practical exercises to it, really, really, really brings out the best in this lens. I love this lens. It was a learning curve. If you catch me at Photoville, I do this a little bit of that workshop in Photoville, and I see a lot of success with it. But if you have these lenses, if you are at the point where you're like, how do I focus better? You probably already know what zone focusing is, but practice the zone focus. Don't just guess. I hate guessing with this lens. It doesn't work. You got to be practical and just know where your distance is, especially at 0.95. But as far as the weight goes, a lot of people complain about the weight. This is the perfect weight for this lens. Everyone says it's really heavy. Well, it is compared to like a 35. But I got into archery a couple of years ago, and guess what? On barebow archery, you have to add weights. But what do weights do? You add weights for stability and stabilization. So that's when I realized, like, wow, this is the perfect weighted lens because it allows you to shoot more stable, especially in dark environments like these shots, shot at 1/30th of a second, handheld at 0.95. And you can see the eyes are razor sharp. It works. You just got to be patient with it. I did see a comment on. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say there's just nothing like this lens when it comes to rendering. I love how your eye just goes exactly where it needs to go because of the fact that you got the foreground to be out of focus, the background's out of focus, it's just your subject. There's an intimacy to this lens that you don't really get with even Summilux lenses. There was a question in the chat that I was looking at where somebody was asking the differences between a Summilux and a Noctilux. If you ever want to get more, if you ever want to get more depth of field, this is it. This is where you go. There is a limit to how much depth of field you can get with the Summilux, and the Noctilux lenses, especially this 0.95 one, just takes it to 11. It really, the depth, the rendering of the lens is very similar to the 1.4. But you just get more. You get more of what you love about that lens in this incredible format.
Yeah, and I saw a comment on why are they not in the price range of the other lenses? Look, this lens is the hardest lens that Leica makes next to the APOs, and everyone, by the way, you can take a factory tour to Wetzlar. They'll show you this behind the scenes, and they'll tell you straight up because they know that it can't be replicated because it takes so much customized formulas in the machines and precision in just grinding it, right? Like we've seen that guy grinding those lenses down. So anyway, for those of you that don't know, they have to shut down the entire lens production pipeline just to recalibrate the machines for the Noctilux and the APO. That takes like a day or two. Once it's calibrated, then they start building the lenses. The problem is with Leica lenses, we don't see the flaws until the very end. That means like when they paint the lacquer of the barrel and they finally see the lights coming through and hitting the sensor, that's when they know the lens is flawed. I won't say what the rejection rate is, but I could tell you they're not pumping out 100% perfected lenses by the end of that 1 month pipeline. And that's why they're so expensive by the time they're done, because the rest don't pass the quality that Leica wants to release. So there's no B grade, there's no C grade. They just straight up like, this is not a Noctilux. It's not worthy of going out to the public. So they'd rather just give you the best. But yes, with that being said, it is the hardest to use. So.
Yeah, and it speaks to, Leica's desire to have lenses that perform incredible wide open. Having a 0.95 lens is great, but being able to actually shoot at 0.95 at a 60 megapixel sensor requires a tremendous amount of engineering and manufacturing know-how to do that. And also, we talked about this before, but there are other companies that make a 0.95, but having it with a spherical glass, this compact is something that's really special on the market. And the reason why
and
we
the
talk about
fringing as
spherical
well.
glass,
I mean, that's not even like talking about the color fringing the other lenses have. Like, it's just
it's
pretty,
something that we all
pretty high.
Yeah, it's something that we definitely take into consideration. We talked a little bit about the durability of these Noctilux lenses. One thing I did not mention is that Leica considers the coefficient of expansion of the materials used inside the lens. What does that mean? It means that when temperatures rise or drop, elements expand or decrease. And Leica considers this physical attribute as something that needs to be considered within the design choices that they make. Why is that important? Well, if you are a customer that is doing a job in the Arctic, for example, and you're in your warm hotel and everything is great, and you take your lens out into the cold, that lens needs to work despite the temperature change between those two environments. And it needs to work the same as if you were in that hotel room. And so to make all those things work, the size, the performance, shooting it wide open, the durability, does command a certain price. And in my opinion, it's something that nobody else makes. It's something very special on the market. John, we're going to show a couple of your images right here. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the 0.95 lens.
Sure. When I guess when the SL came out in 2015, I had been shooting a lot of medium format, the S Type 6 and Type 7 that had just come out. So when the SL came out, I was really looking for a way to have basically a smaller camera, much like Oscar Barnack, a smaller camera, but still have that look of medium format. So the opportunity at that point to try the 50-095, and it just clicked for me about how special a mirrorless platform could be with a lens like this that would be extremely difficult to focus traditionally as a rangefinder. So, these are a couple of shots. I guess on the left with we were doing a workshop with Alan Schaller, and my good friend Rob Passman was the model. Alan brought in his steam machine. Now it was in DC, and I guess that's the toxic fumes from the metro. And then on the right, very early morning in Wynwood, kind of photographing the cleanup after the party. But in both images, to me, you see that depth. You see, the building and the apartment building behind that. You know what it is, yet it's out of focus, and it gives a very three-dimensional look. So for me, in both cases, you're getting enough information to know what it is, and it kind of, as a viewer, gives you something to think about and draws you, like Nathan had said, right to the subject and the point of focus. So it's a lens I don't shoot that often, but it was the one that really captured my imagination when shooting mirrorless.
I think this is a good opportunity to look at some questions from the chat here. We have a question from Matt Debnar. What experience has anyone had using this for video work? Could be really interesting for interviews. Matt, I'm happy to let you know that like a Cine, has the opportunity to, they offer lenses that are 0.95 or f1 specifically for video applications. If you look at the 0.8 lenses, there is a Noctilux in those lenses, and just announced the Hugo lenses from the Cine lenses have an f1. So this is definitely something that is used for video applications, and it's really interesting to see this kind of rendering with moving images. You saw those images from John right there, and there's something really cinematic to those still shots. You can imagine how that could be for moving shots as well. There's another question, which is, before we go to the 75 here, difference between the 0.95 and the 1.2 remake. Love to hear the thoughts of the panelists up here between the two, and when would someone use one over the other? John, you want to start?
Hey, sure. Hey, sure. I was just trying to think. What I do like the size of the 1.2, and I think its rendering characteristics being almost a multiple personality, if you would, like so different, wide open, highlights are glowy, and then stop down, you get something much sharper. The 0.95 to me, again, very cinematic, and I think for me the rendering is more modern. So a big thing for all Leica photographers is kind of this exploration to discover your visual signature and how you want to show your images. So for me, the real difference, I think, comes down to the 1.2 has more of that vintage vibe where the bokeh is a little more swirly, yet in some cases, in different lighting situations, as you saw in the examples we had shown, the contrast is a little heightened, and I think it can look in the right light sharper than the 0.95. To me, the 0.95 is a more modern rendering, but it's wide open. I feel it's more emotional. The bokeh is not as lively. It's more cinematic, or it has really that creamy sharpness of a modern lens, much like the Noctilux, the 75 1.2.5 that we'll talk about in a bit. What do you think, Nathan?
I agree with you. I totally agree with you. I think the first thing to talk about is the size, because there is a size difference between those two lenses. And for some people, there's a limitation to how much they can hold and the weight of that. So that's one thing to consider. With the 0.95, or at least with the 1.2, you can't go to 0.95. That's it. You're limited to 1.2, whereas the 0.95, you can go to any of the other apertures that you want. So you do have that opportunity to choose to go to 1.2 if you wanted to. That being said, I do agree with you with the rendering. When we talk about a more modern rendering, we're talking about trying to control the distortions that appear in an image that is, with an image that has chromatic aberration, for example, or barrel distortion and things like that. The more modern applications of manufacturing and design that we were talking about with the 0.95 really help with chromatic aberration, really help with making sure distortion is corrected. If you look at the MTF charts of the 50mm Noctilux 0.95, the performance of that lens at 5.6 is incredibly high. So if you were doing like a landscape shot or a detail shot with a high megapixel sensor, that lens delivers when it comes to stopping down for those more for the shots that have a little more depth to them.
Especially if you're like at 8, with that at 8 feet away with the 0.95 at f5.6, you can't tell if it's like a Summicron or a Summilux or an Noctilux at that point. Like it's sharp, and people just don't know. Like they'll be like, "Show me the curves." I'm like, I don't measure off curves. I just shoot, and I just know that at 8 feet, that lens is money at 5.6.
Yes,
not enough people do it. Now Peter Carbo would be like, "Oh my God, use it at 5.6." I'm like, okay, yes, put it. But once in a while, it's okay to take it there, but I personally like the 0.95 better just because it's got more of the dreamy look, and especially that yoga picture that you showed earlier. That's a JPEG out of the M11. So I love that I love that look. The 1.2's got a little bit more of a contrast to it, and I think maybe cinematographers might prefer that a little bit more for movies and stuff like that.
Sure.
I know personally a lot of the cinematographers I know that come through LA, actually a lot of them prefer the Summicrons because of that contrast. But I know this lens is not a Summicron, but if you're deciding, should I spend the extra, was it $5,000 difference, $4,000 difference on it? Like my answer is you're gonna be happy with any one. You will be very, very, very happy with either one. They're both great lenses. It just, at the end of the day, what style do you want? And I just like the style of the Dream, the dreamy look.
Yeah, I think that's one of the strong suits of our lens portfolio, especially in the M system, is that there's so many different types of rendering. At the end of the day, what I highly recommend people to do is to try them out, bring an SD card to a Leica store, try these lenses out, because it's very hard. We show off examples right here, but ultimately it's a personal relationship that you have with that lens. If you're looking for a certain type of look, there's a diversity of tools available to you to achieve that look. All right, let's transition over to the 75 Noctilux. Now, the 75 Noctilux is going to be the most modern of all of the Noctilux lenses that we've talked about so far. And what that means is that it has higher contrast and higher resolution, which means that it's able to resolve a very detailed image. In my experience, some of the attributes that we see in the SL APO lenses are visible in this Noctilux lens. We'll talk about that in just a second. John, how about we get you started with your images right here? We have two portraits. Love to hear your thoughts.
Sure. So these were both shot, I guess the one on the left, a one light portrait with the original SL2, so 24 megapixel, and the one on the right, SL2S. And I just really like 24 megapixel, I guess for a number of reasons, mainly a file size, and I find that that's enough resolution. But when you start to look at these images, again, it's how three-dimensional they are. And again, I'm a fan of hard light, where light meets shadow. When you have light and shadow in the same image, to me, I'm trying to when I'm creating images like this, I'm trying to create a feeling that someone that's looking at this image or who I photographed allows them to feel a certain way. And that's basically what I'm trying to communicate, to translate. And I find the 75 Noctilux just does a great job. So here at a close-up of this portrait, you can see I've got a little catch light, but you can clearly see detail in the skin and that transition to and from the plane of focus, and how as we get further away, we know chances are he's wearing a parka that has a fur collar around it, but you can't see the detail of it. And to me, that's part of the magic, is where you have this very sharp image at the plane of focus, and that transition is, for me, what I really enjoy. And it's very much like medium format and reminiscent of medium format. And in general, that's because of my background and how I like to shoot in the cameras that I've shot over the years. That's really what I'm looking for and have identified really as part of my visual signature. It's just that the three-dimensional look. I like sharpness and detail, but I also like the emotion in the bokeh that the 75 Noctilux delivers.
I love this image, John. I mean, you can clearly see how this lens renders as you look into the details here, where the contrast is extremely high at the point of focus and then drops very dramatically right after that.
Right.
The fact that your subject's eyes, their left eye, is already out of focus. You get a little bit of bokeh from that catch light that you were describing there. Razor thin area of focus in this shot here, and yet tremendous amount of detail at that point of focus. It's really quite an achievement optically to get what we're seeing right here on a full frame camera. It's just like you said, the creamy sharpness is very much on display with that out of focus Parker that you're talking about.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. I think the other, I guess, point is just, again, the dimension that image in particular has. I did a lot of portraits that day, and they're all have that just that same look, and it's something that when I see it, I go, that's what I saw in my mind's eye. And using that lens with a mirrorless camera, not only is it, I find it easier to hold, it's the balance is very good, because the 75 is a bit bigger, but it's easier to focus. But like with any Noctilux, you need a lot of time to really learn it and understand it. And the 75, it's different than the 51.2 and the 0.95. And for me, it's a more modern rendering, and we're seeing that what I feel is a heightened contrast at the point of focus that, as you had alluded to, is what we've done with most of the SL lenses, the Apple Summicrons and the two new Summicrons, that have heightened contrast at the point of focus. So where an f2 lens would render more like a 1.4 lens, a Summilux.
And I totally connect with what you said as far as that medium format look. When you have so much depth of field to work with, you could really, and especially if your environment allows for that kind of depth, you could really extend that depth that we're looking for. I mean, it's incredible that this is coming off a full frame. It does not look like a full frame camera, a full frame image. I brought this lens on a hike in the beautiful Cascade Mountains here in Washington. And, it's not the first lens that most people will pick, but I love the way it renders. And I love taking these kinds of lenses to places that people don't tend to take them to, because it provides just a completely different kind of perspective with your subjects here. So we have, a hiker on the left, we have some animals on the right there. And as we zoom in to 100%, again, shooting here with the M11, you can clearly see the rendition of this lens. You can clearly see how this lens renders from the in focus to the out of focus areas, and that transition, in my opinion, is really beautiful. It's just a joy to explore your images with this much resolution. You can really see that this lens outperforms this sensor. I mean, it's one of those things that is something that we do with Leica lenses that I feel people don't talk about a lot, which is the idea of future-proofing these lenses. We were talking about an optical design that we've been using since 1966 on a brand new M11 camera. We're talking 60 years here. That's incredible that that's possible. And we are continuing to do that with these modern lenses. So if we have sensors with higher megapixels in the future, these lenses will be able to be adapted to those sensors. So it is an investment, but it's something that you will keep, again, for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I noticed the comment how it works with the rangefinder. Can I add to that?
Please, absolutely.
So everyone that's been seeing the 75, this is actually the first Noctilux that was designed to be acceptable to be used with the VisuFlex. So at the end of the day, if you are like, man, I have to use the VisuFlex for this, it's fine. That's what it was made for. This lens is very hard to use in the rangefinder. You'll get about 90, maybe 80% of it in focus through the rangefinder. And the rest of your focus has to be your body movement of you bobbing backwards or forwards. And you have to move it like centimeter increments. So if you're trying to perfect it with the barrel, you're not going to get it. You're going to miss the shot, and people are going to people are going to be out of your frame. Things are going to fly away by the time you get focus on it. So you got to get used to the fact that you're going to dial it in about 80, 90%, and then use your body language the rest of the way. And as far as rangefinder goes specifically, but yeah, if you got the EVF, use it. Use the screen.
Yep, absolutely.
There's nothing wrong with it.
Utilize it with an SL. You know, the SL has
it's awesome on the
built-in
SL.
EVF
Love it.
and has stabilization. These are all tools that can help you achieve that shot. John, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this lens with these two images here.
Sure. So we had done an academy with Doyle at the Brooklyn Bazaar, and the lighting was small venue, very challenging. And I shot the 75 Noctilux on the SL, and it was a joy to be able to focus relatively quickly and get some great shots and great exposure. The lighting, the casting is another story. The color casting was really a challenge, but that was a great time, a great workshop, and a lot of people that took the workshop, they all tried the different. We had a 50-095 and some 75 1.2s from people to try and to shoot, and a lot of them took advantage of it, and they got some great images. Then on the right, this was a rainy day in DC at I guess it was Comic-Con a few years back, and I was just standing kind of outside of the convention center, and I saw these two coming out for a smoke. And to me, as soon as I kind of saw them kind of walk into this area, I thought this would be a really interesting shot to have one person lit and the other person kind of in full silhouette. And for me, it really works. And you can really see in the background the texture of the rain, which is something a lot of photographers enjoy doing, is to use those weather elements to kind of isolate or to add an emotional aspect to the image. But to me, it was just one of those things that when you're out shooting and you might be shooting inside and you step away, that you step into an interesting image. You just have to be on guard at all times, because anything can happen.
And I have a couple last images here with the 75, this time with the Noctilux. Sorry, with the M11 monochrome, my apologies. This is shot wide open as well. And, one of the things I really enjoy is combining Noctilux lenses with monochrome cameras, because as we discussed before, Noctilux lenses are designed to accept and to acquire as much light as possible into the camera. And when you have a camera that only records values of luminosity, you really have a match in heaven right here, where both of these tools are working together in synchronicity to get these incredible shots. And what I love about these particular images right here is just how you can dissolve the background. You can make that background just disappear behind your subject. And again, speaking to the resolution of the lens, despite that incredible bokeh that we're seeing behind the subject, as we zoom in to look at the details, the eyes are pinpoint in sharp in focus. You can see details on my subject's fingernails, those transitions of different light moving around the subject's body. Extremely high performance lens for a Noctilux. There are people out there that compare this lens to the EPO lenses. This lens has an extremely high contrast ratio. And again, the contrast that drops behind the subject for the bokeh is very pleasing. I love that separation that you can get with this lens. All right. So as we wrap up this tech talk, I'd love to talk a little bit about just some reasons for you to try out the Noctilux. First of all, just like all the other Leica lenses, we want you to shoot wide open with these lenses. These lenses are the fastest lenses that we make. Again, Noctilux lenses is a lens that's faster than the aperture of 1.4. And these lenses are designed to be shot wide open. We want you to get this look. We want you to get that depth of field. And Leica makes a lot of effort in the design and manufacturing of these lenses to make sure that the performance of these lenses wide open is as good as it can be. We talked about the distinct visual character of these lenses. The 1.2 being, I feel, the lens that has the most character, that has the most kind of energy to these images right here. And as you go to the 0.95 and then go to the 75 1.2, you get more and more modern renditions of a Noctilux lens. Versatility. We can add these lenses to different cameras. There's a number of M cameras that you can attach this lens to, including monochrome cameras or color cameras, but also film cameras. And you can also attach it to other mirrorless cameras, such as the SL. Right now, we are doing a bundle with the SL2 and the 1.2 Noctilux, allowing customers to save up to $1,300, or more than $1,300 actually. And it's a great opportunity for you to utilize these two tools, the SL2 and this wonderful Noctilux, together at a promotional price. Using a manual focus lens allows you to have different opportunities for focusing. Phil, I would love for you to jump on and talk a bit more about focusing with these Noctilux lenses. You talked about zone focusing, for example.
Yeah, with these lenses, they're gonna give you a headache if you keep trying to use the focus patch. Don't do it. Try to master your zone focus. And also, if you don't know how to hyperfocus, try to master hyperfocus with it. And you don't have to start at 0.95 or 1.2. You can start at f8. That's totally fine, just as long as you're training your body to know its distance in the world from other subjects to your own arm and eye, where the body is. So I would say get in the habit of pre-focusing. You want to pre-focus whenever you can. And I think we're such a fast-paced environment now where people want to capture the moment. They don't realize, you know what? At least I tell my students when we approach street photography, look at it like you're going down a hill when you're going down snowboarding or skiing. Pro athletes, they don't just go, they set up a line and then they go. And that's kind of how I do street photography. Set up a line, pick your distance, and then practice staying in that line with that distance. And it'll make your learning experience a lot easier when you get into that. And just don't let the focus patch throw you off. So many students set the lens right, and then they touch it when they look at the focus patch, and they totally ruin the zone, and they can't figure out why. So you just got to get in the habit of getting rid of bad habits, which is touching the lens and trusting the lens. Okay, so.
And finally, these lenses offer a unique experience. The tactile feeling, I don't know if you had the chance to shoot with specifically the 1.2, but it has this beautiful focusing tab to it. And the feel of the lens is just as important as the images that come out of this lens. Leica puts, again, a lot of effort in how the lens feels, the weight distribution, even the sounds of the lens, the clicking mechanism of the aperture, the throw of the lens. All of these things are considered and are designed so that the users have a fun experience shooting photography. Photography should be fun. It should be exciting. And I feel like these lenses really allow you to be put in that mental place to go out and shoot. With that, we want... Yes, Phil.
Really quick, how many minutes do we have?
We have a couple minutes. Yes.
It looks like there's a lot of discussion. Which one, the 1.2 or the 0.95? Now, I'm going to guess they're asking because they used 0.95 is within the same price as a brand new 1.2. I would like to know your guys' opinion on which ones you would pick and why, and I'll do the same. Maybe it'll help them all decide.
So the question is a pre-owned 0.95 versus a new 1.2?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because they're both in the 8,000 to 9,000 range ish, and I know some of them are like if you can only pick one.
I think it really comes down to, each photographer will look for a specific rendering. They don't render the same, and so looking at images with the 1.2, I love the rendering of that lens. I love how there is distortion, there is chromatic aberration that fills up the frame with that incredible bokeh. If you are the type of photographer that doesn't like these kinds of distortions, then the 0.95 might be a better option because of its more modern design. I think the other question, again, that we talked about is the size. The size and the weight. They are different lenses. They do feel different. And carrying a 0.95 lens for a whole day versus carrying a 1.2 for the whole day, there is a difference in weight there. But ultimately, if you want the most versatility, I think that the 0.95 is the better option, just because you do have that extra stop of light. You also get a little bit shallower depth of field that you can work with. And if you want to stop down to have a little more depth into your shot, then you can. You have that opportunity. Whereas the 1.2, you're limited by the 1.2. John, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's always an interesting question when you're asked about gear. The first thing I always tell people is think about what you already have and you're going to buy something new. Why are you buying something new or different? For me, I would lean more towards the 1.2 because it renders completely differently than a modern lens. And I feel most people already have, chances are, modern glass. And if you're looking to add to your look or explore to your look, for my money, the 1.2 is going to give you a completely different look. Provided you like kind of the swirly nature of the bokeh and glowy nature of that bokeh wide open. I also like the size better. It's a lot of times I bring it along because of the size. Like the 75 might be too big for what my plans are that day, what I'm thinking about. So for me, I know compared to everything else that I shoot, the 1.2 is going to be the most different. And that's what I would gravitate to.
I think I'd stick with the
Phil, what do you think?
0.95. I'd go with the 0.95. But there is a significant weight difference. The 0.95 is 1.5 pounds. I think the 1.2 is like just under 0.9 pounds. So
yeah,
it's you're looking at almost double the weight. But I like that weight. I told you why. I shoot a lot in the dark and I like the stability. So
yeah,
I would say practice not holding it up so long. If you do, you're taking too long to focus. But the more that you don't have to hold it up to your eye, the lighter it is, right? So,
yep.
But yeah.
And again, the best way to answer that question is to test it out, whether through photo walks that we have at Leica or going to a Leica store, comparing them side by side, bring your memory card into a Leica store, try them out. Because again, every photographer is different, and these tools are also very different in the way that they are used.
Someone mentioned a 2-day Noctilux workshop. I'd say keep that'd be a little intensive, but keep your eyes out for the in the zone workshops that we'll be offering.
Wanted to share what's coming up next for us at Leica Academy. We are going to be doing another tech talk in about 2 weeks, specifically focusing on monochrome cameras. You can see there's a QR code on the screen. If you utilize this QR code, you can then sign up for the next tech talk. We hope to see you there. And we also have other Academy workshops, specifically food workshops with Jim Sullivan here as well as here in Seattle. John, Phil, thanks again for joining me to talk about the wonderful Noctilux lenses. For those who want to learn more about Leica and Leica Academy, you can see that you can follow us via Instagram at Leica Camera USA or at Leica Academy USA. And we also have our handles here as well if you have any questions and we want to be part of the Leica community to see what's going on around Leica. Phil, John, thank you so much again for joining us.
Thanks for
and
hosting,
looking
guys.
forward to talking soon. Absolutely. Folks, we'll see you the
Awesome.
next one.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks all.